The first day of 8th grade was supposed to be my fresh start. New classroom, new teachers, new possibilities. I had spent the entire summer imagining how different things would be, how I would finally feel seen. But as I sat in Miss Harrington's English class that September morning in 1997, my heart sank when she paused at my name during roll call. Olufemi Adebayo. She squinted at her attendance sheet, her voice trailing off uncertainly. Present, I said, raising my hand. It's pronounced Olufemi Adebayo. I spoke clearly, the way my father had taught me, the way I had practiced in front of the mirror countless times. Miss Harrington's lips pursed slightly. She was a tall woman with graying blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. Her cardigan was buttoned all the way up despite the lingering summer heat. That's quite a mouthful, she said with a tight smile. I think I'll just call you Femi. That's easier, isn't it? Before I could respond, she had already moved on to the next name. Something cold settled in my stomach as I lowered my hand. It wasn't the first time someone had decided my name was too complicated, too foreign, too different. But I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this year might be different. Actually, I prefer my full name, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. A few of my classmates turned to look at me, and I felt my cheeks warm. Miss Harrington glanced up, her eyebrows raised slightly. We have 28 students in this class, dear. I need to keep things moving along. And just like that, I was dismissed, renamed, diminished. I didn't know then that this small moment would spiral into a months-long battle that would test not just my patience, but my very sense of self. I couldn't have predicted how one teacher's refusal to say my name correctly would uncover deeper prejudices, or how the unexpected ally who finally came to my defense would change everything. But looking back now, I realized that 8th grade wasn't just about learning algebra and American history. It was the year I learned to stand up for myself, the year I learned that my identity was worth fighting for. The first few weeks of school settled into a rhythm, and Miss Harrington's English class became the hour I dreaded most each day. Every time she called me Femi instead of Olufemi, something inside me shrank a little more. I had tried correcting her 3 more times, but each attempt was met with the same dismissive response. It's just easier this way, she would say, with a smile that never reached her eyes. We need to be practical. What hurt most was watching her carefully pronounce other students' names. Anastasia Wojciechowski was never shortened to Anna. Michael Brzezinski was never called Mike, unless he specifically requested it. She even took the time to learn how to properly roll the R in Eduardo Rodriguez's name. Just not mine. At home. I didn't tell my parents at first. They had enough to worry about. My father worked 2 jobs, teaching physics at the community college during the day and driving for a rideshare service at night. My mother was finishing her nursing degree while working part-time at the hospital. They had sacrificed so much to build a life for us in America after immigrating from Nigeria when I was just 3 years old. But one evening, as I pushed my jollof rice around my plate, my mother noticed. Olufemi, she said, her voice gentle but probing. What is troubling you? You've been quiet these past weeks. I looked up at her face, the warm brown of her skin illuminated by our dining room light, the familiar pattern of tiny scars near her temple that she'd had since childhood. The strength in her features always gave me courage. My English teacher won't say my name, I finally admitted. She calls me Femi instead. I've asked her to use my full name, but she says it's too difficult. My father set down his fork, his expression darkening. Too difficult. He repeated, his accent thickening as it always did when he was upset. Your name has meaning. Purpose. It is not for her to decide it is too difficult. Olufemi means, God loves me, my mother reminded me, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. It was your grandfather's name, and his father's before him. It carries our history. I know, I said. I've tried telling her, but she just moves on to something else. My father pushed his chair back. I will speak with this teacher. No, I said quickly. Please, no. It'll only make things worse. The thought of my father confronting Miss Harrington made my stomach clench with anxiety. I'd seen how people sometimes looked at him when his voice rose, how they misinterpreted his passionate Nigerian manner of speaking as aggression. I'll handle it myself. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, my mother nodded. You are growing up, she said. But remember, standing up for yourself doesn't mean standing alone. If you need us, we are here. That night, I lay in bed thinking about names and identity, about how my name connected me to a homeland I barely remembered, except through my parents' stories and the traditions we kept alive in our home, about how, when pronounced correctly, it sounded like music to my ears. I fell asleep, determined to try once more with Miss Harrington. The next day, I stayed after class, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it across the room. I waited until the last student filed out before approaching her desk. Miss Harrington. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Can I talk to you for a minute? She glanced up from the papers she was sorting. Yes, Femi. Make it quick, please. I have a faculty meeting in 10 minutes. I took a deep breath. That's actually what I wanted to talk about. My name is Olufemi, not Femi. It's really important to me that you use my full name. Miss Harrington sighed, setting down her red pen. I understand that you're attached to your name, but sometimes we need to adapt to make things easier for everyone. But it's not easier for me, I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. And you pronounce everyone else's full name correctly. A flash of something, annoyance, defensiveness, crossed her face. Those names are different. How? Challenged, surprising myself with my boldness. They just are, she said, her tone clipped. Look, the school day is very busy. I have 150 students to keep track of. Shortening names is a common practice. But you only shortened mine, I pointed out, and I've asked you multiple times not to. She stood up, gathering her materials. I think you're being oversensitive about this. It's just a nickname. It's not a nickname if I didn't choose it, I said, my frustration building. My name is important to my family and my culture. It means God loves me, in Yoruba. That's nice, she said dismissively. But this is America, and sometimes we need to make adjustments to fit in. I'm trying to help you, actually. Life will be easier for you if you learn to blend in a bit more. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Blend in. The implication was clear. My difference was a problem to be solved, not an identity to be respected. I don't want to blend in, I said quietly. I just want to be called by my name. Miss Harrington checked her watch. I really need to go now. We can discuss this another time if you're still concerned. She walked toward the door, effectively, ending the conversation. I stood there for several moments after she left, a mix of emotions churning inside me, anger, hurt and a deep sense of powerlessness. But beneath it all, something else was taking root. Determination. The situation didn't improve over the next few weeks. If anything, Ms. Harrington seemed to call on Femi more often in class, as if to reinforce her choice. Each time I would respond with a quiet correction. "It's Olufemi," which she would ignore. Some of my classmates began to notice the pattern. Zoe, who sat next to me, leaned over one day after a particularly pointed exchange. "Why does she keep doing that?" she whispered. "It's not like your name is hard to say. Olufemi." She pronounced it perfectly. I shrugged, though her understanding meant more to me than I could express. "I don't know. It's messed up," Zoe said. "My sister had a teacher who kept mispronouncing her friend's Vietnamese name last year. Their parents had to go to the principal." The mention of the principal made me consider my options. I could escalate this, but what if it backfired? Ms. Harrington graded our essays, our class participation, our final projects. She had power over my academic future. Instead, I tried a different approach. The following week, we were assigned a personal narrative essay. The prompt was simple. Write about a time when you faced a challenge and how you overcame it. I wrote about my name, about how it connected me to my heritage, how my grandfather had whispered it into my ear the last time we visited Nigeria when I was 6, how each syllable carried the weight of my family's hopes and dreams. And yes, I wrote about how it felt when people refused to learn it, to say it correctly, to honor the fullness of who I was. I wrote with all the emotion and eloquence I could muster, hoping that maybe, if Ms. Harrington could understand what my name meant to me, she might change her approach. When she returned our graded essays, mine had a large red C+ at the top. Her only comment, "Too emotional. Personal challenges. Should be substantive, not trivial matters. See me after class." After the bell rang, I approached her desk, the essay clutched in my hand. "You wanted to see me?" I said. "Yes," Ms. Harrington replied, not looking up immediately. "About your essay." "What was wrong with it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. I followed the prompt. I wrote about a challenge. She finally looked at me. "Femi, a name is just a name. There are children facing real challenges, poverty, illness, family tragedy. Your essay trivialized the assignment." I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "It's not trivial to me," I managed to say. "And my name is Olufemi." Ms. Harrington's expression hardened slightly. "This insistence is becoming disruptive. I'm trying to teach you an important life lesson about picking your battles. But why should my name be a battle at all?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts. "You learn everyone else's name." "That's enough," she said firmly. "You can rewrite the essay if you want a better grade. Choose a more appropriate. Challenge next time." I left the classroom that day with my essay crumpled in my fist and tears threatening to spill. It wasn't just about my name anymore. It was about being told that my feelings, my identity, my experiences didn't matter, weren't substantive enough. That evening I finally showed the essay, and Ms. Harrington's comments to my parents. My father's face grew stormy as he read, while my mother's expression shifted from concern to resolve. "We are going to speak with the principal," my mother said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This has gone on long enough." For once, I didn't object. Principal Davis's office felt smaller than it looked from the outside. The three of us, my parents and I, sat in uncomfortable chairs across from his desk while I recounted the past 2 months of interactions with Ms. Harrington. "I see," Principal Davis said when I finished. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "And you've attempted to address this directly with Ms. Harrington?" "Multiple times," I confirmed. My father leaned forward. "My daughter's name carries our family legacy. In our culture, names have deep meaning. They are not convenience items, to be shortened at will." "I understand your concern, Mr. Adebayo," Principal Davis said, nodding. "And I agree that every student deserves to be addressed properly." "Then what will you do about it?" my mother asked directly. Principal Davis straightened some papers on his desk. "I'll speak with Ms. Harrington about this matter. We have a policy of respecting cultural diversity, and that includes names." "And the essay grade?" my father pressed. "Our daughter was essentially punished for advocating for herself." Principal Davis looked less certain about this. "Grading is somewhat subjective, but I'll review the situation with Ms. Harrington." We left with his assurances that the matter would be addressed promptly. I wanted to believe him, but something in his carefully measured response left me doubtful. My doubt proved warranted. The following week, Ms. Harrington called me Olufemi exactly once when Principal Davis popped in for a classroom observation. The moment he left, she reverted to Femi. Even worse, she found subtle ways to make her displeasure known. My raised hand was overlooked during discussions. My contributions were met with faint praise, if acknowledged at all. Nothing overt, enough to complain about, but enough to make the message clear. I had crossed a line by involving the administration. By early November, I had resigned myself to getting through the year however I could. I focused on excelling in my other classes and tried to minimize my interactions with Ms. Harrington. The wound was still there, but I was learning to work around it. Then Ms. Lawrence arrived. "Good morning, class," Ms. Harrington announced one Monday. "We have a guest today. This is Ms. Lawrence from the university. She's completing her teaching practicum and will be observing our class for the next few weeks." Ms. Lawrence smiled warmly at us. She was younger than Ms. Harrington, perhaps, in her late 20s with dark brown skin and hair styled in neat box braids. Something about her presence immediately changed the energy in the room. "Thank you for having me," she said. "I'm excited to learn from Ms. Harrington and all of you." For the first part of the class, Ms. Lawrence sat quietly in the back, taking notes as Ms. Harrington led a discussion on The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. When it came time for small group work, Ms. Lawrence circulated around the room, stopping at each cluster of desks to listen and occasionally offer guidance. When she reached our group, she looked at each of us in turn. "And your names are?" "I'm Zoe." "Eduardo." "Alex." When she turned to me, I hesitated for just a moment. "Olufemi," I said, pronouncing it clearly. Ms. Lawrence smiled. "Olufemi," she repeated perfectly. "That's a beautiful name. Yoruba, right? It means, 'God loves me.'" I stared at her in surprise. "Yes. How did you know?" "I studied African literature in college," she explained. "Names and their meanings were part of what we learned. Names carry stories. For the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. Here was someone who not only pronounced my name correctly on the first try, but understood its significance without me having to explain. From across the room, I noticed Ms. Harrington, watching our interaction with a slight frown. The next day, Ms. Lawrence was back. This time, she took a more active role, leading a small portion of the lesson while Ms. Harrington observed. When it came time to call on students for responses, Miss Harrington interjected before Ms. Lawrence could begin. "Let me help you with the names," she offered. As students raised their hands, Miss Harrington identified them. "That's Michael, Christina, Femi." Miss Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly when I raised my hand shortly after. "Yes." She paused, looking at me directly. "Olufemi," I said. "Yes, Olufemi," Miss Lawrence continued smoothly. "What are your thoughts on the protagonist's motivation?" I answered the question, acutely aware of Miss Harrington's gaze boring into me from the side of the room. When class ended, I hurried to gather my things, but Miss Lawrence approached my desk. "Olufemi," she said quietly. "Is there a reason Miss Harrington called you something different?" I hesitated, glancing toward where Miss Harrington was erasing the whiteboard. "She thinks my name is too difficult," I finally admitted, keeping my voice low. Something flashed in Miss Lawrence's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. "I see," she said simply. "Thank you for telling me." I didn't think much of the exchange at the time, but the next day, everything changed. It started as a typical Wednesday. Miss Harrington was leading a lesson on literary devices, with Miss Lawrence observing from her usual spot. About 20 minutes into class, Miss Harrington asked for volunteers to identify examples of foreshadowing in the text we were studying. I raised my hand, along with several others. "Femi!" Miss Harrington called on me. Before I could answer, Miss Lawrence stood up. The movement was so unexpected that the whole class turned to look at her. "Excuse me, Miss Harrington," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I notice you called the student Femi, but yesterday she identified herself as Olufemi. Is there a reason for the discrepancy?" The classroom fell silent. Miss Harrington's smile froze on her face. "Femi is just a shortened version," she said, dismissively. "It's easier." "Easier for whom?" Ms. Lawrence asked, still maintaining her professional tone. "Because names are fundamental to identity, and as educators, one of our primary responsibilities is to respect the identities of our students." Miss Harrington's cheeks flushed slightly. "I appreciate your input, Ms. Lawrence, but I've been teaching for 27 years. I know how to manage a classroom." "I don't doubt your experience," Ms. Lawrence replied. "But I'm curious. Has Olufemi requested that you use this shortened version of her name?" All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their attention, the sudden spotlight making my skin prickle with heat. But something about Ms. Lawrence's calm confidence gave me courage. "No," I said clearly. "I've asked Miss Harrington several times to use my full name. My parents even came in to speak with Principal Davis about it." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Miss Harrington's expression shifted from embarrassment to barely concealed anger. "Perhaps this is a discussion better had in private," she said tightly. "I disagree," Ms. Lawrence responded. "This is actually an excellent teaching moment." She turned to address the class. "Names carry power. Throughout history, the renaming of people, particularly people of color, has been a form of control and erasure. When we choose to ignore someone's name or change it for our convenience, we're participating in that history, whether we intend to or not." The tension in the room was palpable. Some students looked uncomfortable, others fascinated. Miss Harrington stood rigid by the whiteboard. "Ms. Lawrence," she said, her voice strained, "you are overstepping your role as an observer. Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "I think this is exactly what education should look like." We all turned to see Principal Davis standing there, arms crossed. How long he had been listening, I couldn't tell. "Principal Davis," Ms. Harrington started, "this is highly irregular." "What's irregular?" He interrupted. "Is that we're still having this conversation after the meeting with Olufemi's parents. May I speak with both of you in the hallway, please?" As Miss Harrington and Miss Lawrence followed him out, the classroom erupted into whispers. Zoe turned to me, her eyes wide. "That was intense," she said. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my heart was racing. "I think so." "Ms. Lawrence is awesome," Eduardo commented from across the aisle. "She stood up for you in front of everybody." "Yeah," Alex added. "I didn't realize Miss Harrington was being such a—" He caught himself. "So difficult about your name. That's messed up." Their support washed over me like a warm wave. For weeks I had felt isolated in this struggle, as if I was making too big a deal out of something small. Now, suddenly, others were validating what I had felt all along. When the three adults returned several minutes later, Principal Davis addressed the class. "Students, there's been a change of plans for today. Ms. Lawrence is going to lead a special lesson, with Ms. Harrington's assistance." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Ms. Harrington's face was tight with suppressed emotion as she took a seat at the back of the room. Ms. Lawrence moved to the front, her posture relaxed but purposeful. "Today," she began, "we're going to learn about the power of names in literature and in life." What followed was the most engaging English class I had ever experienced. Ms. Lawrence discussed how authors use naming symbolically in literature, from Pip in Great Expectations to the nameless narrator in Invisible Man. She talked about naming traditions across different cultures and how names often tell stories of heritage, hope, and history. "Now," she said, looking around the room, "I'd like to invite each of you to share something about your own name. Its meaning, its origin, or perhaps a story connected to it. This is voluntary, of course." One by one, students began to share. Christina talked about being named after her Greek grandmother. Eduardo explained how his name connected him to his father and grandfather, creating a lineage of Eduardos spanning 3 generations. Even quiet Alex opened up about how his full name, Alexander, was chosen because it meant defender of people, which his parents hoped would inspire him to stand up for others. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath. "My name is Olufemi Adebayo," I began. In Yoruba, Olufemi means God loves me. It was my grandfather's name. Before he died, he told me that carrying his name meant carrying his blessing. My last name, Adebayo, means the crown meets joy. My parents gave me this name to remind me that I come from royalty, not literal kings and queens, but people of dignity and worth. As I spoke, I felt a strange lightness spreading through me, all these months of being diminished, of having a piece of myself erased daily, and now here I was, reclaiming my full identity in front of everyone. "That's beautiful, Olufemi," Ms. Lawrence said warmly. "Thank you for sharing that with us." From the back of the room, Ms. Harrington watched silently, her expression unreadable. By the end of that class, something fundamental had shifted. I walked out of the room standing taller than I had in months. My name, my full name, ringing in my ears like a song. The changes that followed were both subtle and profound. The next day, Miss Harrington called me Olufemi during roll call. Her pronunciation was still a bit stiff, but it was my name. All of it. She did not meet my eyes as she said it, but it was a start. Ms. Lawrence continued her practicum, co-teaching, several more lessons over the next few weeks. Her presence seemed to have a lasting effect on the classroom dynamic. Students began to engage more deeply with the material, sharing personal connections to the literature we studied. Ms. Harrington, too, gradually adapted her teaching style, incorporating more discussion about cultural context and author background. One afternoon in early December, as I was leaving class, Miss Harrington called me back. "Olufemi," she said, and I noticed she was making a conscious effort with the pronunciation. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded, curious and a little apprehensive. She gestured to the chair beside her desk. "I owe you an apology," she said once I was seated. The words seemed difficult for her to say. "I was wrong to insist on shortening your name, especially after you repeatedly asked me not to." I sat in stunned silence, unsure how to respond. "The truth is," she continued, her fingers fidgeting with a paperclip, "I grew up in a very homogeneous community. Different names, different cultures. They weren't part of my experience. That's not an excuse. But perhaps it helps explain why She trailed off. "Why you thought my name was too difficult," I supplied. She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Yes. Ms. Lawrence helped me see that my discomfort with unfamiliar names was my problem to solve, not yours, and certainly not by erasing parts of your identity." Her apology wasn't perfect. There was still a sense that she didn't fully grasp the depth of what she had done. But it was genuine, and in that moment it was enough. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "My name is important to me." "As it should be," she agreed. "And Olufemi, I also owe you a grade revision." She handed me my personal narrative essay, now marked with an A. "Your writing was powerful and honest. I should have recognized that." As I left the classroom that day, essay in hand, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. Things wouldn't be perfect with Miss Harrington. Too much had happened for that. But there was movement, a shift in understanding that felt like progress. The rest of the school year unfolded with a new rhythm. Miss Harrington never again shortened my name, and while our relationship remained somewhat formal, there was a baseline of respect that hadn't existed before. Ms. Lawrence completed her practicum, but stayed in touch, occasionally visiting to guest teach a lesson or help with special projects. On the last day of 8th grade, Ms. Lawrence gave me a small wrapped package. "A graduation gift," she explained with a smile. Inside was a journal with my name, Olufemi Adebayo, embossed in gold on the leather cover. "For all the stories you have yet to tell," she had written on the first page. "Never let anyone diminish who you are." "21 years later, those words still guide me. I'm now Dr. Olufemi Adebayo, a professor of education specializing in multicultural classroom practices. I train future teachers to create inclusive learning environments where every student feels seen and respected. Sometimes I share my 8th grade experience with my students, using it as a case study in how seemingly small acts of erasure can cause deep harm, and how one person standing up can create meaningful change. I still correspond with Ms. Lawrence, who became a mentor, and eventually a colleague when I entered the field of education. As for Ms. Harrington, our paths crossed again in a way I never could have predicted. Last autumn, I was giving a keynote address at an educational conference on identity and belonging in the classroom. As I scanned the audience during the Q&A session, my eyes landed on a familiar face, older now, but unmistakable. Miss Harrington raised her hand, and when the moderator called on her, she stood. "Thank you for your powerful presentation," she began. "I was wondering if you could speak more about how teachers can address their own biases when they come from backgrounds where diversity wasn't part of their experience." I answered her question, thoroughly, speaking about self-reflection, continuous learning, and the importance of listening to students. Throughout my response, I maintained eye contact with her, wondering if she recognized me, if she remembered the black girl whose name she had refused to say. After the session ended, she approached the podium as I was gathering my materials. "Dr. Adebayo," she said. Her voice was shakier than I remembered, her posture less commanding. "You probably don't remember me, but—" "Ms. Harrington," I said. "I remember you very well." She blinked in surprise. "You do? It's been so long." "Some lessons stay with us," I replied simply. Her face fell slightly. "Not my finest teaching moment, I'm afraid." "Actually," I said, "in an unexpected way, it was. That experience helped shape my understanding of how important it is for educators to respect their students' full identities. It influenced my career path." She seemed to absorb this, emotions playing across her face. "I retired from teaching 5 years ago," she told me. "Now I volunteer with a literacy program for refugee children. I've been trying to do better, learn more, but I still make mistakes." There was a vulnerability in her admission that touched me. We all have our journeys toward greater understanding, and hers had clearly continued long after our paths diverged. "Would you like to join me for coffee?" I asked impulsively. "I have about an hour before my next session." Over cappuccinos in the Conference Center Cafe, Ms. Harrington told me about her life since Jefferson Middle School, about how Ms. Lawrence's intervention that day had prompted her to gradually reassess many of her teaching practices, about the challenges of changing long-held perspectives, about her literacy work now, with children whose names and cultures were entirely unfamiliar to her when she began. "I practice their names at home," she said, "over and over until I get them right. I ask about their meanings, their stories." She smiled ruefully. "I think about you often, actually. I wish I could go back and do things differently." "We can't change the past," I told her. "But the work you're doing now matters." When it was time for me to leave for my next session, she hesitated, then asked, "Would it be possible? Could I attend your workshop tomorrow? The one on creating inclusive classroom libraries? I volunteer at a community center now, and we're trying to expand our book collection." "Of course," I said, writing down the room number for her. As I handed her the slip of paper, I added, "And Ms. Harrington, thank you for coming today, for listening." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Dr. Adebayo, for everything." As I watched her walk away, I thought about the complex journey that had brought us both to this moment. How the painful experience of having my name, my identity, diminished had ultimately led me to work that helps prevent other children from facing the same erasure. How Ms. Harrington, despite her initial resistance, had eventually found her way to growth and change. And I thought about the power of names, how mine, Olufemi, God loves me, had carried me through difficult times, reminding me of my worth when others questioned it, how it connected me to my heritage, my family, my full self. I wonder about your experiences with your own name. Has someone ever mispronounced it deliberately, shortened it without permission, or treated it as an inconvenience? How did you respond? Or perhaps you've witnessed this happening to someone else. These small moments of erasure happen every day, in classrooms, workplaces, and communities across the country. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it, whether they're struggling to have their own identity respected or learning to better honor the identities of others. Because names matter. Identity matters. And standing up for respect, even in the face of resistance, can create ripples of change that travel much further than we might imagine. Sometimes the simplest act of insisting on being fully seen can transform not just our own experience, but the experiences of countless others who follow in our path. I am Olufemi Adebayo, all of me, and that will always be enough.